They sat in that lawyer's office like they owned the air inside it. His mother had her hands folded. His sister was already on her phone, probably calculating. His brother had driven 3 hours and still found time to stop for a coffee he held like a trophy. And me? I was sitting in the back corner of a room I had cleaned 100 times, in the house I had helped pay for, next to the man I had loved for 7 years, and not one of them had told me there was going to be a reading. I found out about my father-in-law's the same way I found out about most things in that family. By accident. By overhearing. By being the last to know in a house where I was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. But here is the thing they did not count on. I had been quiet for so long that they had forgotten quiet is not the same as blind. I had seen everything, I had saved everything, and when that lawyer cleared his throat and started reading, what happened next was not what any of them planned for, not even close. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something and I want you to really sit with it. If you spent 7 years loving a family that never once looked at you like you belonged, would you have stayed as long as Maya did? Or is there a point where kindness stops being a virtue and starts being something people take advantage of? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And stay with me, because the moment that changes everything is coming, and when it hits, you will feel it. My name is Maya, and I want to start by telling you something that took me a long time to admit out loud. I was not naive, I was not stupid, I was not blind, I was hopeful, and for a very long time I confused hoping with seeing clearly. I kept thinking that if I gave enough, loved enough, stayed patient enough, the people around me would eventually see what I was doing and feel something about it. Gratitude, maybe, or at least basic acknowledgement. It never came, not the way I needed it to. But by the time I understood that, I had already built something they needed, and that changed everything. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the ending only makes sense when you understand how long the beginning actually lasted. I met Daniel when I was 26. He was warm, funny, a little chaotic, and the kind of person who made every room feel lighter just by walking into it. We were together for 8 months before he introduced me to his family. He kept saying the timing was not right. He kept saying his mother was going through a hard year. He kept saying they just needed a little more time to settle before he brought someone new into the picture. I did not think much of it then. I loved him, and I trusted him, and I figured families were complicated in their own private ways. The day he finally brought me to their house, I remember standing at the front door with a pie I had baked from scratch because I wanted to make a good first impression. Daniel's mother, Eileen, opened the door, looked at me, looked at the pie, said, "Oh, you didn't have to do that," in a tone that made it sound like I had done something presumptuous, and then walked back inside without holding the door open for me. Daniel caught the door before it closed on my face. He gave me a small, apologetic smile. I remember thinking it was nerves. I remember thinking she was shy. I remember choosing, in that 1 second, to give her the benefit of the doubt. That was the first time I made that choice. It was not the last. Eileen was 61 years old, sharp-tongued, meticulous about her house, and completely devoted to her son in the way that some mothers are devoted, not in a soft way, but in a possessive, territorial way that dressed itself up as love. She had 3 children. Daniel was the oldest. Then there was Karen, 32, who lived 40 minutes away and called her mother every single day. And then there was Marcus, 29, who had never quite launched, who lived in the basement of his parents' house, and who had an opinion about everything and the follow-through for almost nothing. Daniel's father, Robert, was the quieter one. He was a tall, steady man with a dry sense of humor and a habit of watching the room before he spoke. He worked in commercial real estate for 30 years. He had done well. Not wealthy, but comfortable in the way where comfort becomes invisible because it has always been there. Robert was kind to me from the beginning. Nothing dramatic, nothing effusive. He just treated me like a person, which in that family turned out to be more meaningful than it sounds. The first year was uncomfortable in small ways that I kept minimizing. Eileen would cook Sunday dinners and set the table for 6, then remember at the last minute that she had forgotten to add a setting for me. She would ask Daniel questions about his life and not turn to include me, even when the answer directly involved the two of us. E would tell family stories at the dinner table and never once prompt me to share my own. After 6 months of Sunday dinners, she still called me Daniel's friend, when speaking to her neighbors. Karen was more openly cold. She had a way of speaking about me in the third person when I was standing right there. She once said, while I was passing the salad, "I just don't see what the rush is." Nobody asked what she meant. Nobody had to. Marcus was indifferent in the way that some people are indifferent when they simply do not register you as relevant. He was not hostile. He was just absent, even when he was present. Daniel defended me when I brought it up. He would say his mother was old-fashioned. He would say Karen was protective. He would say Marcus was just Marcus. He would squeeze my hand and tell me they would come around. He said it with such certainty that I kept believing him. I want to be honest about something here because I think it matters. I did not stay in that family dynamic out of weakness. I stayed because I genuinely loved Daniel. Because outside of his family, he was attentive, thoughtful, present. He was a good partner to me in the private parts of our life. It was only in the family context that something in him shifted, like he became a slightly different version of himself, one who needed to keep the peace more than he needed to tell the truth. I understood that. I had seen it in other people. I thought he would grow past it. We got engaged after 3 years. Daniel proposed in our apartment, just the two of us, with a ring he had saved for quietly and a speech that made me cry in the good way. It was one of the best nights of my life. His family found out 3 days later. Eileen called that same evening. I could hear her voice through the phone, a tight, careful voice, saying, "Well, that's a big decision." Karen texted Daniel but not me. Marcus said congratulations the following Sunday without looking up from his plate. I told myself the wedding planning would bring us all closer. I told myself this was their way of warming up slowly. I told myself I just had to earn it. The wedding planning was its own kind of education. Eileen had opinions about everything. The venue, the flowers, the invitations, the guest list, the seating, the food, the timing of the ceremony. She had strong opinions and soft ways of expressing them. She would not tell me directly what she wanted. She would tell Daniel. Daniel would tell me. And when I pushed back on anything, it would circle back to Eileen as Maya being difficult. I once chose a venue after weeks of searching, a beautiful outdoor space with garden lighting and a courtyard I had fallen in love with on first sight. I brought pictures. I showed Daniel. He loved it. We went to see it together and he held my hand the whole time and said it was perfect. That Sunday, Eileen mentioned that her friend's daughter had used the same venue and had some issues. She did not specify what issues. She did not elaborate. She just let the comment sit there like a seed. 3 days later, Daniel told me he thought we should keep looking. I asked him directly. I asked him if his mother had said something. He said no, he had just been thinking. I knew it was not true, but I could not prove it, and I was so tired of seeming like the paranoid one that I let it go. We ended up with a venue Eileen had suggested. It was fine. It was perfectly fine. But it was not the place I had chosen. And I remember standing at the altar on my wedding day, in a space I had not picked, surrounded by flowers in a color I had compromised on, in a dress that had been gently critiqued by my mother-in-law until I started second-guessing the one I had loved, and I remember thinking that this should feel bigger than it does. Daniel looked at me like I was everything, and I loved him. I really did. But something had already been quietly taken from me that day, and I had been too focused on keeping peace to protect it. After the wedding, we moved into a house 20 minutes from his parents. I thought the distance would help. It helped a little. But the proximity was never really physical with Eileen. It was relational. She had a way of being present in our home without being in it, through Daniel's phone, through Sunday obligations, through the quiet pressure of family expectation that sat over our life like weather. The first 2 years of marriage were happy in bursts and difficult in patterns. We were good together in private, but the family intrusion was constant. Eileen called Daniel every morning. Not every few days, every morning. He would take the call in another room sometimes, but I could always hear the low murmur of it, and I noticed that after those calls he was sometimes different. Quieter, more distracted. Occasionally, mildly defensive with me about nothing in particular. I brought it up gently one evening. I said I had noticed the calls were long, and that afterward he so. Times seemed tense. He said his mother was just checking in. He said she was getting older and that she got anxious. He said it was not a big deal. I dropped it. I dropped so many things in those years. By our third year of marriage, I had a job I was good at and proud of. I worked in hospital administration, managing department budgets, coordinating between medical staff and operations, the kind of work that required calm under pressure and careful attention to detail. I was good at it. I had been promoted twice. I felt capable and purposeful in that space in a way that I sometimes did not feel inside my own home. Robert, Daniel's father, had started showing signs of something. A little forgetfulness at first, then more. He misplaced his keys. He lost track of conversations mid-sentence. He asked the same question twice in a row with no awareness of having asked it. By the time he was officially diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia, Daniel's whole family had already been privately bracing for it for months. Nobody told me. I found out when Daniel mentioned it in passing as we were getting ready for bed one night. He said his dad had gotten the official result and that it was dementia. I asked how long he had known they were testing for it. He said a few months. A few months. That was the first time I felt genuinely invisible in that family, in a way I could not explain away. I went to the next doctor's appointment with Daniel. I sat in the waiting room, and then in the consultation room, and I listened carefully, and I asked one practical question about care planning and medication scheduling, because that is the kind of thinking I do. The doctor looked at me with the kind of respect you give someone useful. Eileen looked at me like I had inserted myself somewhere I did not belong. That night I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic, just a small notebook where I wrote dates and details. I did not know why I was doing it. I told myself it was habit, but something in the back of my mind had started paying closer attention. Robert's decline was slow at first and then faster. Eileen was the primary caregiver, which was right and natural. But Eileen was 64 herself, and she had never handled the financial side of their life, the insurance, the accounts, the property paperwork, any of it. Robert had managed all of it himself. Over the next 6 months, Daniel became the one his mother called when she had a question she could not answer. He started driving over 2 and 3 times a week. He started spending Saturdays there. I started going too, not because I was asked, but because I was his wife and I did not want to sit at home alone while he was gone, and because somewhere in me I thought showing up would eventually mean something. I cooked, I organized medical paperwork. I called insurance companies on hold for 45 minutes while Eileen sat in the living room watching her programs. I sorted through bills. I researched home care options and put together a printed summary comparing 3 different services, with costs and availability and contact numbers, because that is how my mind works. I left it on the kitchen counter. Eileen picked it up, looked at it, set it back down, and never mentioned it again. She later told Daniel she had found a service through her friend at church, which turned out to be one of the 3 I had researched, though she never made that connection out loud. Karen came on weekends sometimes. She brought food and sat with her mother and cried and called it difficult. She did not organize anything. She did not call insurance companies. She did not research care options. But when family decisions were discussed, she was in the room and I was not. Marcus continued to live in the basement. He started playing a role I had not seen him in before. He became Eileen's emotional ally, the child who stayed close in proximity if not in substance, who validated her worries and confirmed her feelings and agreed with whatever she said. He and Karen were a unit. They had always been a unit in the way that the younger children sometimes are, bonded by their shared distance from the oldest. Daniel was caught in the middle. I could see it. He loved me and he loved them, and he kept trying to be everything to everyone without giving anyone quite enough. Robert grew worse through the winter. There were weeks where he recognized everyone and weeks where he did not. I had a particular rhythm with him that surprised even me. I would sit with him in the afternoons sometimes while Eileen rested, and I would bring a cup of tea and ask him about his early years in real estate, and something in the asking would open him up in a way that medication schedules and family anxiety could not. He told me stories I do not think he had told anyone in years. About his first deal, about the partner who cheated him and what he learned from it, about what he most wanted for his children. Once, on a clear afternoon in November, he looked at me with complete focus and said, "You're a good woman, Maya, better than they know." I did not know what to say, I just squeezed his hand. I wrote it down that night. I wrote down the date and the words exactly as he said them. The following spring, Robert had a bad episode followed by a hospitalization. He stabilized, but the family shifted into a new kind of alert, the kind where everyone sensed the end was no longer far. Eileen became more controlling. She started making decisions about Robert's care without consulting Daniel, then calling Daniel to inform him. Karen started coming every weekend. Marcus stopped pretending to look for work. And I was there, still, steady, still keeping notes, still showing up, still being treated like a guest in a situation I had invested years of my life in. It was around this time that I noticed something strange. I had been helping organize Robert's paperwork, insurance documents, property files, the kind of administrative pile that accumulates over a lifetime. Daniel had asked me to help because the volume was overwhelming and because I was good at it. I was sorting through a file box one afternoon when I came across an old folder labeled Estate Initial Draft. I did not open it. It was not my place and I knew it. But I noticed it existed, and I noticed that it was old, and I wondered quietly whether it had been updated. I mentioned it to Daniel that evening. I asked, gently, whether his father had an updated estate plan. Daniel said he thought so. He said his dad had a lawyer he had worked with for years. He said not to worry about it. I did not push, but I did not stop noticing. Two things happened in the same week, that July, that began to crack the surface of everything I had been keeping smooth, by sheer force of patience. The first was a Sunday dinner where Karen and Marcus were talking about the lake house. Robert and Eileen owned a small lake house 2 hours north, a place the family had used every summer for 20 years. I had been there 4 times. I had cleaned it, stocked it, fixed a broken screen door, repainted a peeling windowsill with supplies I brought myself. I loved it, genuinely. It felt like the one place in that family's world where I was slightly less of an outsider. Karen was saying that she thought the lake house should stay in the family and that it would be nice if it could be passed down properly. Marcus agreed loudly. Eileen nodded with her hands folded. Daniel said nothing. I said nothing. But I watched the way nobody looked at me during that conversation, and I felt, with a clarity I could not dismiss, that I was not considered part of the family they were describing. The second thing happened 3 days later. I was picking up a prescription at the pharmacy near Eileen's house when I ran into her neighbor, Carol, a sweet older woman who had known the family for 20 years. Carol asked how I was holding up with everything. I said I was managing. She said she had heard the family was getting things organized, and that it was good Robert had taken care of things while he still could. She said it as though she was confirming something I already knew. I smiled and said yes. I said it was good to be prepared. I went home and sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes. Carol knew something I did not. I was almost certain of it. I thought about asking Daniel directly. I thought about it for a week. Every time I almost said something, I watched his face and I could see the weight he was already carrying, and I told myself it was not the right time. But the truth was I was also afraid. Afraid that if I asked, the answer would be the one I was already suspecting. The answer I was suspecting was that someone had made a decision about my future without including me in the conversation. Robert passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in October. He had been at home. Eileen was with him. Daniel drove over as soon as he got the call. I went with him. The grief in that house that day was thick and specific. Eileen sat in the kitchen chair where she always sat and did not speak for a long time. Karen arrived within the hour and held her mother and cried openly. Marcus sat at the table and stared at the wall. Daniel stood in the doorway between rooms, trying to be present in all of them at once. I made coffee. I called the funeral home because nobody else was doing it and someone had to. I found the folder of important documents Daniel had told me existed, and I set it on the counter where it could be found when needed. I handled everything I could handle without being asked to. Robert was buried on a Friday. The service was beautiful and specific to who he was. I helped write the obituary because Daniel had started it and stopped 3 times. I stayed close to Daniel through all of it. At the reception after the burial, held at Eileen's house, Karen gave a short speech about her father. Marcus said a few words. D. Aniel spoke longest and most honestly, and I was proud of him. Nobody asked me to say anything. I had known Robert as well as anyone in that room by the end. I had sat with him through his worst days and his clearest ones. but I stood against the wall with a plate of food I was not eating, and I said nothing because nobody asked. That was the day I stopped minimizing. Not loudly, not dramatically, but something in me made a quiet, clean decision that day. I was done pretending not to see. I was done calling it nerves or old-fashioned or complicated. I was done allowing other people's comfort to take priority over my own reality. I went home that night and I opened the notebook I had been keeping for 2 years and I read it from the beginning. Every date, every incident, every detail. And I saw, written in my own handwriting, what I had been unwilling to say out loud. This family had never accepted me. Not once. Not for a single sustained period. Every small warmth had been followed by a withdrawal. Every time I had contributed something real, something critical, it had been absorbed without acknowledgement, and then handed forward as if it had always been theirs. I also saw, reading those notes, something I had not consciously connected before. In the months leading up to Robert's death, there had been several conversations I had not been included in. Several trips Daniel had made to the family home without mentioning them until after. A lawyer's name mentioned once in passing by Karen, and then immediately dropped when I walked into the kitchen. I was not paranoid, I was paying attention. 3 weeks after the funeral, Daniel sat me down and told me there was going to be a reading of the will. He said the lawyer had scheduled it. He said it would be at the family home. He mentioned the date. He mentioned the time. And then he said, "You don't have to come if you don't want to." That sentence, that specific sentence. I looked at him for a long moment. I asked him why he would say that. He said he just thought it might be stressful, and that family estate things could get emotional, and he did not want me to be uncomfortable. I said I would be there. He looked relieved and worried at the same time, and I filed that expression away carefully. The night before the reading, I did something I had not done before. I called a lawyer. Not to make a move or file anything or take any action. I called to understand. I had a consultation over the phone with an estate attorney I found through my hospital's employee assistance program. I told her the general outline. I asked her what a spouse's rights typically looked like in estate matters in our state. I asked what it meant if a spouse had not been included in the estate planning process. I asked what protections existed and under what circumstances they applied. She told me, and what she told me mattered enormously. In our state, a surviving spouse has what is called an elective share right. This means that regardless of what a will says, a surviving spouse cannot be completely disinherited by their partner's family. This applied to Daniel, not to me directly. I was not Robert's surviving spouse. But what it told me was that estate documents could be contested, that omissions could be reviewed, that the legal ground was not as clean as whoever had drafted that will might have assumed. She also told me something that stopped me cold. She asked whether I had any documentation of my contributions to the estate, financial, caregiving, property-related. I told her I might. She said that documentation of spousal contribution to a family estate, particularly in cases where assets had been commingled, or where one party had provided care or financial support connected to estate property, could be relevant depending on the specific circumstances. I thanked her, hung up, and opened my notebook. Then I opened my email and my banking app, and I began to build a different kind of document. I want to be honest about how I felt that night. I was not excited. I was not planning revenge in some triumphant way. I was grieving. I was grieving Robert, who had been kind to me. I was grieving the 7 years I had spent trying to belong. I was grieving the version of this family I had kept hoping they would become. But I was also clear. I was clearer than I had been in years. And clarity, even when it hurts, is better than the fog of hoping. The morning of the reading I dressed carefully. Not dramatically, I did not wear anything designed to make a statement. I wore a simple dark dress, the kind I would wear to a professional meeting. I put my notebook and a printed document in my bag. I drove myself. I arrived at Eileen's house at the same time as Daniel. He had driven separately because he had come from dropping something off at Marcus's friend's place. When we walked in together, Eileen looked at me with an expression I can only describe as controlled surprise, like she had expected me not to come and had not quite hidden that expectation. Karen was already there. Marcus was already there. The lawyer, a man named Gerald who looked about 60 with reading glasses on a chain, was setting papers out at the dining room table. He had a quiet, practiced manner. He said hello to Daniel and to me both and called us by name, which I noted. I sat beside Daniel. Eileen sat at the head of the table in the chair that had always been hers. Karen sat to her left. Marcus sat beside Karen. Gerald explained the process briefly. He said the will was clear and that he would read the primary document and then address any questions. He began. The bulk of the estate, the primary house, the majority of the investment accounts, the personal property, went to Eileen as surviving spouse. That was expected and right. Gerald moved through it steadily. Then he got to the secondary provisions. These were the instructions for what happened after Eileen's passing, or in the event she chose to transfer certain assets before that time. The lake house was listed. Robert had specified that the lake house should be assessed and divided equitably among his 3 children, Daniel, Karen, and Marcus, with the condition that any division respect the contributions of each child's household to the maintenance and care of the property. Daniel's household, not Daniel alone, his household. Karen looked up from her hands. Marcus shifted in his seat. Gerald continued. There was also a separate provision, a handwritten addendum that Robert had added to the will 14 months before his death. Gerald unfolded it and read it aloud. It said, in Robert's own language, that he wanted it noted that his daughter-in-law Maya had been a consistent and meaningful presence in the care of himself and his wife during his illness, and that he believed any distribution of the secondary estate should reflect that fact. He had not assigned a dollar amount. He had not created a binding legal instrument, but he had written my name, he had written what I had done, he had written it clearly. The room was very quiet. Eileen's face went through several things in rapid succession. Karen was staring at the table. Marcus had his arms crossed. Daniel looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him before, not quite surprise, but something like recognition. Like he was seeing something he had half known come into full focus. Gerald finished reading. He set the document down. He asked if there were questions. Karen spoke first. She said she had not known about the addendum. Her voice was careful. Gerald said it had been added at Robert's explicit request during one of their meetings, at a time when Robert was assessed as legally competent to make amendments. He said this with the tone of someone who had prepared for this question. Eileen said nothing at first. Then she said, very quietly, that she was surprised. She said she would need time to think about it. What happened after that reading happened over several weeks, and I want to walk you through it because the story did not end in that room. It began there. Karen called Daniel that same night. I heard his half of the conversation from the kitchen. She said she thought the addendum was unusual and that she was not sure it was really what their father intended. She said the word coerced once and then walked it back. Daniel told her quietly but firmly that their father had been legally competent when he added it and that the lawyer had confirmed that. Karen said she would want to look into it further. Daniel said that was her choice. When Daniel came back into the kitchen, I was making tea. He sat down at the table. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he was sorry. He said he was sorry that he had not fought harder for me inside his family. He said he could see now what the years had cost me, and that he had told himself it was fine when it was not fine, because he had not wanted to face what facing it would require. I sat across from him. I said I knew. I said I believed him. I said we had a lot to talk about and that I was willing to have those conversations, but that I needed him to understand something first. I said that the version of me that kept quiet and kept adjusting and kept absorbing was gone. Not because I was angry, though I had been, but because I finally understood my own value clearly enough to stop negotiating it away. He nodded. He looked like a person hearing something true. Eileen called me directly 2 days later. This was unusual. In 7 years, she had never called me without a specific logistical reason. Her voice on the phone was careful and a little stiff, the way a person sounds when they have rehearsed something. She said she wanted me to know that she had always thought of me as part of the family. She said she knew she had not always been easy to connect with. She said Robert had always been fond of me. I listened without interrupting. When she was done, I said, "Thank you." I said I appreciated her calling. I said I hoped we would be able to find a way forward that felt honest for both of us. I did not say everything I could have said. I did not need to. The call itself was already the thing I had waited years for and never received. She had acknowledged me directly, without being forced to by anything except the weight of what had been written in that room. That call lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because I looked at my phone afterward. 3 weeks after the reading, Karen reached out. She sent a message through Daniel's phone first, asking if she could talk to me. I said she could call me directly. She did. She started the conversation by saying she hoped there were no hard feelings. I said I did not hold on to hard feelings when they were not productive. She said she thought, looking back, that she had been protective of her mother in ways that were probably not always fair to me. She said probably, and I noted it, but I let it stand. I told her I had always wanted a good relationship with her. I told her that was still true. I told her that going forward, I would need that relationship to be mutual rather than one-sided. She said she understood. Marcus never called, but he stopped being dismissive at the few gatherings where we ended up in the same room, which was its own kind of quiet acknowledgement. The estate process moved forward over the following months. Eileen chose, on her own, to begin the process of transferring a share of the lake house to Daniel as Robert had specified. She also made a separate, informal gesture. She asked Daniel and me to come to the lake house for a weekend in the spring, just the three of us. She said she wanted to start fresh with some things. We went. It was not magical. It was not the warm family reconciliation that movies would make of it. It was awkward and tender in equal parts. Eileen made coffee in the morning, and she and I sat on the porch while Daniel was still sleeping, and she asked me how my work was going, and I told her, and she listened. Really listened. It was the first real conversation we had ever had. I want to tell you something about what quiet justice feels like from the inside, because I think people have the wrong picture of it sometimes. It does not feel like winning. It does not feel like standing over someone who has fallen. It does not feel triumphant in the way that imagining it does when you are in the middle of the pain. What it actually feels like is space. Suddenly having room to breathe that you did not realize you had been denied. Suddenly not having to carry the weight of other people's refusal to see you. Suddenly not performing patience because you have exhausted it and are now simply living with your eyes open. I did not get an apology from everyone. I did not need one from everyone. What I needed was what I got, the proof that I had always been right about my own experience, written in my late father-in-law's handwriting, in a document that could not be revised or explained away or diminished. He had seen me. He had said so, and he had made sure the records showed it. Daniel and I went to couples therapy that year. Not because our marriage was over, but because we both wanted it to be something different than it had been, something where I did not disappear inside his family's needs, and he did not excuse it to keep the peace. It was not easy. It brought up things that were difficult to say and harder to hear. But it was real. It was the first time in our marriage that we were building something together rather than managing something separately. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About 8 months after the reading, I was cleaning out a drawer in the study. We had started combining our home offices because we had both shifted to more remote work, and I found a card I had never seen before. It was in an envelope with my name on it, in handwriting I recognized as Robert's. The card inside was a simple one, no occasion printed on it. Inside, in his slanted handwriting, it said, "Maya, you are the steady thing, I hope you know it." I do not know when he wrote it. I do not know when Daniel had found it or why it had ended up in that drawer. I never asked. Some things do not need an investigation. Some things just need to be received. I sat on the floor of that study for a long time with that card. I cried, the way you cry when you have been holding something for so long that the release of it is almost physical. I cried for Robert, who had been decent and clear-eyed even when his mind was slipping. I cried for the years I had spent doubting my own worth in rooms full of people who were supposed to be my family. I cried because it was over, not just Robert's life but that chapter of my own, the chapter where I needed their approval to feel legitimate. I put the card in the same box where I keep the notebook. I do not need to look at it often, but I know it is there. These days, I am different in ways that are hard to fully describe but easy to feel. I take up space in rooms without asking permission. I speak when I have something to say, and I do not fill the silence when I do not. I stopped performing warmth for people who had not earned it, and I stopped apologizing for having boundaries that I used to pretend were not there. Daniel is different too. He is more present. He is less afraid of his family's displeasure and more committed to us as a partnership. It took time to get there. It took honesty that was uncomfortable for both of us. But we got there. Eileen and I are not close, but we are respectful. She calls me by my name now instead of Daniel's wife in front of her neighbors. It sounds like a small thing. It is not a small thing. Karen and I have a functional relationship that neither of us is pretending is more than it is, which is, strangely, more comfortable than the false warmth we were doing before. Marcus is Marcus. What I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is not the satisfaction of the moment in that lawyer's office. That moment was real and it mattered, and I will not pretend otherwise. But it was not the point. The point is everything before it. The point is the notebook. The point is the lawyer I called the night before. The point is the 7 years of staying present and doing real work in a family that was trying to make me invisible. The point is that I was never invisible. They just had not made it official yet. Robert made it official. And everything else followed from there. I used to wonder, in the hardest years, whether the quiet way I had chosen to live inside that family, choosing patience over confrontation, choosing evidence over drama, choosing to stay and do the work rather than leave and be proven right from a distance, was a mistake. I used to wonder whether I had just been too slow to protect myself. I do not wonder that anymore. There is a version of this story where I left earlier, where I made a loud exit, where I told them all exactly what I thought in one cathartic afternoon. That version might have felt better in the short term, but I would not have been in that room. I would not have had those years with Robert at the end of his life, the conversations over tea, the afternoon he told me I was better than they knew. I would not have had that card in the drawer. I stayed because I loved Daniel, and because I had made a commitment I meant. I stayed because I am not someone who quits on people I love just because loving them gets hard. But staying did not mean disappearing. Staying did not mean accepting treatment that reduced me. Staying meant being fully, quietly, undeniably present until the truth had nowhere left to hide. They treated me like a stranger for 7 years. They forgot, I think, that strangers do not keep records. Strangers do not spend Saturdays sorting through insurance documents. Strangers do not sit with a dying man over afternoon tea and listen until he trusts them with the things he most needs to say. Strangers do not hold a family together quietly while the people who claim ownership of it are busy managing appearances. I was never a stranger. I was always the steady thing. And now they know it. If Maya's story hit you somewhere deep, I want you to take a second before you scroll, because stories like this are not just stories. Someone you know has been the steady thing in a room full of people who refuse to see them. Maybe that someone is you. If it is you, I want you to hear this clearly. The record always catches up. Keep your evidence. Keep your receipts. Keep showing up as yourself. And when the moment arrives, you will not need to raise your voice. Drop a comment and tell me the moment you finally stopped asking permission to be seen. I want to hear it. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs it today.